This is 757 Saturday Sports Talk with Matt Hatfield and Coach Ed Young on ESPN Radio 94.1.
And back here on 757 Saturday Sports Talk on ESPN Radio 94.1, brought to you by Larry King Law with the Coach Ed Young. I am Matt Hatfield. We're privileged to be joined with one of the best in the business when it comes to talking basketball. He's with the Monter Draft News, college basketball news, and the NBA draft is right around the corner, just days away. We say hello here on ESPN Radio 94.1 to our pal from Minnesota, Chris Monter. Chris, how you doing out there?
Great to be with you. How are you guys today?
I'm doing swell. I guess things could be worse. It's really tough right now with this pandemic, everything going on, affecting the sports world in so many different ways. But we got the draft right around the corner, and hopefully we got a lot of basketball talk and topics to discuss amongst our friends and ourselves and have some things to watch.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of a weird situation. Obviously, the draft normally is held the last Thursday in June. This year in November, obviously, we didn't have an NCAA tournament, which was sad. That's one of my favorite times of the year. And normally the NBA season will be going on right now. Now, we're not quite sure when it's going to start, either December or January. Still up in the air a little bit, obviously, like you mentioned about the COVID cases and whether or not you can even have fans at the games. But the draft is Wednesday this upcoming week, so only just a few days. Should be an interesting draft because you have a lot of players who maybe aren't household names, people that maybe fans haven't seen a lot, but I think a pretty deep draft, but maybe not a star-laden draft like maybe we've seen in the past.
Well, you've been doing it for a long time. You've seen some of the very best at the high school level before they even get to college and covered them and documented them there with the Monter Draft News and college basketball news. I will get to this draft here in a moment, but the other night on TV, I don't know if you got a chance to watch it, Chris, but two mega names in the high school basketball scene, Amani Bates, who's class of 2022, a Michigan State pledge, and then Chet Holmgren, the 7-foot unicorn, if you will, a Minnesota native, went head-to-head. And by all indications from the basketball experts out there, those two guys could be lottery picks, slam dunks, either number one, number two picks in the coming years. Have you gotten a chance to watch these two guys, and do you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I live in Minnesota, so it's kind of funny because people, when you say you're from Minnesota to other parts of the country, they always think cold weather, which I guess there is sometimes. We were 70s like a week and a half ago. Now we have snow on the ground, so definitely can change here in Minnesota. But Minnesota is becoming more of a basketball state every year. I mean, it's known as the land of hockey. A lot of great hockey players from the United States have come from Minnesota. But this year, you could see 4 players being drafted in the NBA draft, maybe 2 first-rounders, maybe 2 second-rounders. Maybe could have possibly 3 first-rounders drafted. If they would have had a McDonald's All-American game, there were 2 kids from Minnesota who were going to play in that game. And Chet Holmgren is definitely a very intriguing player, a 7-footer. One of my buddies does the Arizona site for Rivals.com. He said he was at the Pangos camp. He's based out of Arizona. That was held just recently. And he said Chet Holmgren put on the best performance he's ever seen a basketball player do, which shocked me because he's seen a lot of the great players. He said he had 25 blocks in the 2 games, just ran the floor extremely well, dunking, shooting from outside, passing ability. So it's great to see a Minnesota kid being ranked that high. He plays on a very talented team. They had a kid last year, Jalen Suggs, who would have been in that McDonald's All-American game, who's going to be at Gonzaga. Gonzaga's the preseason number 1 team. They have another kid, Prince Alegbe, who's been offered by everybody. And then they have a couple kids who transferred during the school year. Their last name is Miller. Their father, Percy Miller, is Master P, the rapper who tried to play, who wanted to try and play pro basketball. So Holmgren's a very intriguing player. Bates out of Michigan has already committed to Michigan State. I saw a lot of reports saying he might be the best high school player since LeBron James, which is pretty heady stuff. I always said that Kevin Garnett was the best high school player I'd ever seen until I saw LeBron James. I think LeBron's the best high school player I've ever seen since. Nobody's passed him, but obviously big words from those 2 talented players. And you're right, those are players that you might be seeing in an NBA draft very soon.
So remember those names, Ed: Amani Bates and Chet Holmgren, who I don't think is related to Mike Holmgren, the former Seahawks and Packers coach.
Any chance?
Yeah, his dad actually played at the University of Minnesota. I know a lot of Gopher fans are hoping he'll come here. Unfortunately, Minnesota's had a hard time keeping some of that in-state talent. I mentioned there's 4 kids that might be drafted in the NBA draft this year from Minnesota. Only one of them played for the Gophers. One played at Duke, one played at Stanford. So obviously they haven't been able to keep those top flight players in the skate. So, but they are in the final 6 for Chet. But lot of fans are hoping he would follow his father's footsteps and play at Minnesota.
I just like to get a chance to have those kids transfer to Nance River High School.
I'm sure you and many others.
Hey, Chris, it's great to hear from you, man. I think of our times when I first met you way back early at the PIT when I was coaching in there, and you were an up-and-comer in the basketball media world, and now you're on top of the world, and I'm still coaching high school basketball.
Well, it's great to talk to you as well. You've done a great job. I know coaching not only in the PIT but high school, and had great success. It's great to talk to you once again as well.
Well, Chris, one of the things I got to ask you, tell me, LaMelo Ball is not the best guy to draft. I could just remember this dude when he played high school here. Of course, all the fluff with his dad. And I don't want to hurt a kid because of a parent situation, but I can't believe somebody's going to take him number one over an Edwards guy or the kid from Dayton. Even the Wiseman from Memphis only got to play a couple games, but it is a very different NBA nowadays, and it's intriguing. And if anybody knows about these kids in particular, it's you. So school me on this.
Yeah, you're right. I think there is not the consensus number one pick. Everybody knew the minute the college season ended that Zion Williamson was going to be the number one pick, and he had an outstanding season. Unfortunately, he was kind of cut short by injuries, but you see, the excitement level with him. A lot of fans bought tickets in New Orleans, bought a lot of Williamson gear. He was a very popular player. He did the one thing I never thought could happen, made Duke a likable team. Most people I know who are, casual or maybe even diehard basketball fans either like Duke or hate Duke. There's really probably no in between. But he made fans really like Duke. This year there isn't that player. You mentioned Anthony Edwards, played at Georgia, was the top scorer among freshmen, but his team would not have made the NCAA tournament probably unless they would have won the SEC tournament, which I really doubt. James Wiseman, as you mentioned, only played a couple of games early with Memphis and then was ruled ineligible. LaMelo Ball has played overseas in Lithuania and Australia the last couple of years. So those are players that really aren't household names. Obi Toppin, you mentioned, won the Wooden Award. I vote for that award. He and Luke Garza won several of the big coaching, Player of the Year awards. But again, he's not even a player that, that many people maybe saw as much as you'd like to think. Dayton would have been a number one seed and had a great chance to maybe even be a Final Four or who knows team. But most people didn't get a chance to see him because, a lot of fans really get into basketball with the NCAA tournament. And of course, we didn't have that. But this is a unique draft for Minnesota. As I mentioned, I'm based out of Minnesota. The team, unfortunately, has not had great success. They made the playoffs once in the last 16 years. The owner is planning on selling the team. I think a lot of fans are hopeful for that, thinking maybe that will change the fortunes. They've never been lucky in the lottery. The one year they had the worst record in the league. That year, Shaquille O'Neal and Alonzo Mourning were the number one and number two picks. They got Christian Laettner, great college player, but was never the player that those guys were, and that's really hurt them. They haven't really been able to get the player to kind of get them over the hump. They have some good young players with Karl Anthony Towns and D'Angelo Russell. They acquired last year. He's really good friends with Karl Anthony Towns. They're hoping those two can play together, but they really need that third player. But the question is, like you said, these are young players. Edwards, great scorer, great athlete, but not a great outside shooter. The Timberwolves were never a three-point shooting team until last year. They kind of changed their philosophy a little bit with a new general manager who came from Houston where they shoot a lot of threes. They shot the third most threes in the league, but made the 29th most threes. So not a great outside shooting team. And Edwards isn't a great shooter. LaMelo Ball's not a great shooter, so that doesn't help you. James Wiseman, a 7'1" player who runs the floor extremely well, great athlete, 7'6" wingspan, but he's a little bit sort of like Karl Anthony Towns in a way, and the NBA has kind of become more of a perimeter game. Can you play two players who are basically 7-footers together? That's the big question mark. And, this isn't a draft where there's that great player that a team, drafting 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, might give up a lot to get up to number one because the feeling is those three are very good players, but will any of those players be stars? Ball, you mentioned, great passer, comes from a basketball family. You could question LeVar Ball, and I do, but you got to give him some credit reverse-wise. He's going to have two kids who are probably drafted among the top two picks. Lonzo was the second overall pick. Now with the New Orleans Pelicans, LaMelo could be the number one pick. Probably doesn't get past the third pick. Despite some deficiencies in the game, he really knows how to pass the ball. 6'8", great size at the point guard spot. Needs to be a better defender. But again, has been through a lot basketball-wise, has actually some good maturity. His teammates seem to like him from the reports I've gotten about him. So it'll be interesting to see who goes number one, because there isn't like a consensus number one, like I mentioned.
We're talking with Chris Monter of the Monter Draft News, College Basketball News, collegebasketballnews.com. You can follow him on Twitter at collegebbnews. He also writes for gopherhole.com. It's 757 Saturday Sports Talk here on ESPN Radio 94.1. Ed?
Well, Chris, you kind of touched on this, too. Would this not be, and of course, Minnesota, as you said, not had a lot of luck in the drafting and that. Could this be a year where, okay, let's really list some offers, maybe pile up some future picks, because there's no consensus number one guy. Minnesota is a young team. Maybe put some money towards free agency, which is about to break next week, too. Because I just keep thinking back, was it a couple years back when Cleveland picked Anthony Bennett? Everybody thought, okay, Bennett would be something. And way back in the day when I think Portland took a LaRue Martin, and those were complete busts. And I just have a feeling this might be a good time for them to trade him. What's the feeling there in Minnesota?
Yeah, I think that's a possibility. They had the 10th. They had the number one pick overall, obviously. They had the 17th pick, and then they have a very high second-round pick, the 33rd pick. Unfortunately, next year, they might not have their pick. It's lottery protected, but they traded that pick to get rid of Andrew Wiggins, a former number one pick who put up good numbers scoring, but really didn't do a lot of anything else. He shot a lot of mid-range jumpers, didn't shoot a great percentage, didn't really play defense, didn't get to the line. So they traded him, so they don't have a first-round pick next year. So you're right. There's the thought that maybe you try and get that pick back or protect yourself that way, because if you add another young player, you might not be a very good team next year, and you possibly can lose that pick. Like I said, the problem with this draft is anybody that enamored with any of these three that they're really willing to give all that much up to get those players? I think the feeling is maybe there isn't that big of a difference in terms of plateaus from that top three to maybe the next three. I think there is a difference, but is it a big enough difference for a team to really want to give up a lot? And that's the problem if you're Minnesota. If you're not sure who you're going to pick number one, that might mean nobody else is sure about who should go number one either.
Mm-hmm. Couple names for you, Chris, and we appreciate the time as always. Tyrese Halliburton out of Iowa State. If I were to tell you he gets Rookie of the Year and a team like, say, the Hawks were to get him and pair him with Trae Young, it could take them out of the irrelevant category to, most NBA observers would say, possibly nabbing one of those final playoff spots. What would you say? The Hawks may be there, and what about Halliburton? What do you think?
Yeah, he's a very talented player. Originally from Wisconsin near me, and then played at Iowa State right down below Minnesota on the map. Very tall, athletic point guard, 6'5", great passer, a pretty good outside shooter. I think that's one thing, obviously moving for the NBA line, obviously a little tougher, but I think he has the ability to be a good outside shooter. I think you look at him, he has got, like I said, great size, very good rebounder. But again, it's had some injury problems. That's the one knock you'd maybe have on him. But you're right, I think he's a player. The Knicks, the Hawks, there's quite a few teams, Detroit, that maybe could use a player at the point guard spot. So I think he definitely makes sense in that, say, 4 to 6 type range. And you're right, I think Trae Young has really developed. A lot of people question him, because of that Luka Doncic trade. But I think Doncic obviously is going to be maybe a future MVP. But I think Trae Young has shown that he's a very talented player in his own right and really made strides from his rookie to his sophomore season. But I think, again, getting some to help him take some of that pressure off him, I think would be nice. And again, if you draft a player like Halliburton, you can maybe play those two together. Young's a little bit smaller. He can maybe guard the smaller guards, where Halliburton's 6'5", so he can maybe guard the shooting guard. So I think that would be a combination that might work.
I loved Cole Anthony when I saw him at the Bill Williams Sportsplex a couple years ago, but the word I'm getting, Chris, is there's a question of how much teammates like playing with him from some I've spoken to in basketball circles. So kind of a two-part question. Do you like Greg's son among the most outside the top 10 list, if you will? And give me kind of a read on some of these mid to late first-round guards from major programs. You got Cole Anthony at Carolina. You got Trey Jones at Duke. You got Cassius Winston at Michigan State. Who do you like? Give me a read on Cole if you can.
Yeah, obviously, you're right. He comes from a basketball family. The funny thing, like you mentioned, Greg, his father was known as a great defender, but really not much of a scorer, where Cole, his primary emphasis seemed to be at North Carolina. Again, he had some injury issues as well as a freshman that affected North Carolina. And obviously, they had one of the worst years ever for a program that's always been year in, year out, one of the best programs in the country. But, has that basketball mentality, but needs to become, like you said, maybe more of a leader. Maybe having that kind of year where he didn't have the success that he's used to, maybe that, makes you think, hey, maybe I need to change my game a little bit as well. You mentioned Trae Jones, a Minnesota kid. grew up in Apple Valley, which is like the next city over from me. So I've known his family forever. I used to play basketball actually against his dad and mom. His mom was probably the best girl player I ever played against.
Oh, wow.
So he's another player. Tyrell Terry, another Minnesota kid who's stock really moving up, 6'3", a guard from Stanford. You know, I always thought he'd be a guy who might be a 3 or 4 year guy, but he had such a good freshman season in the Pac-12 that he thought about coming out. So I think those are a couple players you definitely have to look at. Cassius Winston, you know, great college player, a little bit undersized maybe at the NBA level, but a proven leader. And I think, again, when you go to a school like Michigan State, play for Coach Izzo, and you look at all the success he's had with guards in the past, you know, he knows how to play the game. You know, probably more of a second-rounder, I think. But, again, you know, at 6'1", that's going to maybe hurt him a little bit. But, again, I think he's a player because he's played basically 140 college games. He's played against lots of great competition. He's maybe more ready to step in and contribute as a backup than maybe a younger player who's maybe just played one season in college.
Chris, that was going to be my next question about maybe who are some of the sleepers to watch out for. But how about let's kind of move into free agency. That's coming up starting next week too. Any feels that you're getting about who's going to move where? Number one, on maybe some of the top free agents, and then number two, just came out recently that supposedly Russell Westbrook is a little unhappy in Houston and now wants traded. So some information on that situation too.
Well, you're right. I think there's going to be some interesting movement because you have some players, and again, we don't know what's going to happen with the NBA season. Are there going to be fans there? If you're a team, can you afford to pay some of these big salaries when you're not getting their revenue? I think I read that Golden State, by not having fans in the stands, loses $3 million every game. So obviously you have a lot of big question marks what you're going to do. And we've seen that in the past where if you're not a great team, you might as well maybe, I don't want to use the word tank, but, you know, if you're a middle-of-the-road team, it's hard to get out of that hump. And I think you could see some moves. Obviously, there's been talk about Chris Paul, who was traded for Westbrook, maybe ending up at Phoenix. Does Houston try and make a move with a new general manager there, a new head coach there? Do they try and do something with Harden or Westbrook, or do they try and pair it up one more time and see how far they can get? Small ball didn't really necessarily work, that well. Do you go to a little bit more of a traditional team? Philadelphia, I think, will be an interesting team. They have a new head coach in Doc Rivers. Do they keep Embiid and Ben Simmons together, and they try and move one of those players to get some help? So the problem with the free agent group, there isn't a lot of great players. I think you look at Anthony Davis; he has a player option. I would be shocked if he doesn't stay with the Lakers. Try and win another title. I think Brandon Ingram could be an interesting player. He's a restricted free agent, but New Orleans, I think we'll try and keep him there. He was one of the most improved players in the league, and I think they feel they can pair him, with Lonzo Ball and, Zion, and have a nice group of players. I think Fred VanVleet will be interesting. He's an outstanding player who's really worked hard to improve his game. I remember seeing as a high school player play for a team that didn't have any really big shoe affiliations, and they beat a lot of good teams to win a local tournament here in Minnesota, beat the Atlanta Celtics, beat California Pump and Run, but beat some of the big teams. He's a player who's really improved his game. I think he could get a big contract just because there aren't a lot of point guards in this draft. Gordon Hayward could be interesting. He's got a big contract, but has a player option, but has some injury problems. So, again, I don't think this is a great group of free agents. So I think that hurts a little bit. But, teams are going to maybe try and make some moves. But, again, I still wonder how much teams are going to want to spend if they're not going to get all that revenue that they're hoping for. Obviously, it's probably going to be a shortened season for sure, either 60, 70 games, and then with no fans, how much can teams really afford to spend on free agents? So I think the smaller markets, could really be hurt by all this.
He is the editor and publisher of College Basketball News, the Monter Draft News. Go check it out online, collegebasketballnews.com, and make sure you give him a follow on Twitter, too, at College BB News. Chris Monter joining us here on 757 Saturday Sports Talk. Enjoy your weekend, the draft coming up, and we'll keep in touch. All right, buddy?
I hope so. Thanks again, guys. Have a great weekend.